You may wonder why I even care about this question. You know, for much of my life, people criticize creationists for saying, but they would say, well, believing in creation is like believing in flat earth. And for much of my life, that was simply hyperbole, because nobody believed the earth was flat until about a decade ago. And there was this unleashing of flat earth onto the world. And it soon spread. I first learned about it in February of 2016. And what happened to me in 5 or 6 days, less than a week, I had 3 different conversations with 3 different adults concerned about 3 different young people who were getting into this. And I think I was traveling at the time and speaking, and I realized on my trip there was something going on out there. So I got home and I got online and started looking, and it didn't take me very long to find out there was a flat earth movement out there. I caught on to it about a year or 2 into its explosion on the internet. And here I am today, because now when people say, well, like believing in creation is like believing in flat earth, well, I don't want to be associated with those people. And I've done research extensively since then. Since then, I have read several books, probably half a dozen books at least, written in the last decade about flat earth. And it really was a resurrection of a flat earth movement that was around in the late 19th century, very early 20th century. And I read probably a dozen or more of those books that I could find. They're pretty easy to find now. The internet's been helpful in that and also bad for that. I have spent far more hours watching YouTube videos about flat earth than I would care to admit to. And I have been to 4 flat earth conventions. Yes, there are such things. In fact, I was at one just 2 weeks ago, less than 2 weeks ago. It was a 2-week event, a 2-day event that we had in Las Vegas. I went there. I don't like Las Vegas anyway. So it was really suffering to go there in many respects. But I have made friends in the flat earth community. Many of them know who I am. And some of them treat me pretty badly, but most of them treat me pretty well. There's a lot of hot debate back and forth on either side. People on either side accusing the other people of stupidity and all these kind of things. And even if people believe foolish things, you're never going to win them over by calling them names and insulting them. So it calls for patience with people if you're going to deal with people like this. And the first question I get from people is when they hear that I'm looking into this and discussing this, they say, wait a minute, didn't we settle this whole issue 500 years ago? I mean, didn't Columbus, wasn't he the one who proved that the earth was a globe? And I don't know how it is in Europe and how it is in Germany, but in the United States, we all grew up with this understanding that everybody thought the world was flat until Columbus showed otherwise. Joel, have that story here in Germany as well? And turns out it's not true. We didn't settle it 500 years ago. We actually settled it 25 centuries ago. 2,000 years before Columbus, people in the West knew that the earth was a globe. For instance, Pythagoras in the 6th century said the earth was a globe. Now, we don't have his writings on this. People much later wrote about Pythagoras and what he taught, and unfortunately, they don't tell us the reasons why he thought that. Ditto for Parmenides in the next century, 5th century BC. He taught the earth was a globe, but we don't know his reasons. Now, I will congratulate the flat earthers on a couple of things. One of them is this whole question raises a very good epistemological question, study. You all know what epistemology is. Here's a definition for you from Merriam-Webster. It says it's a study or theory of the nature and grounds of knowledge, especially with reference to its limits and validity. Let me make it even more simple. The definition I like to use is epistemology is how we know what we know. And that was very important to me. The years I taught at the university, I taught astronomy and physics. And I thought it was far more important that my students understand the why of things, how we know these things, not just what they are. For instance, this is a good example. The Earth is a globe. I would ask my students early on in first semester of astronomy class, and we would get to the history of astronomy, and I would ask them what shape of the Earth is. And today, back then they'd all say, well, the Earth was spherical. I shudder to think, if I were still at the university, if I asked that question, what kind of answers I would get today. I would dare say if I had a class of 30 students, there would be at least one person in there who had real questions about that and maybe thought the world was flat. I guess it's good that I left the university when I did, before this all began. But then I would ask, and how did the students know that? Well, before they started school, everybody was telling them that the Earth was ball-shaped. But I would have a class of 30 students, and I would ask them, how do you know the Earth is spherical? And almost never would I have a single student who could give me a good reason. I once had a student who gave me a good reason, but she didn't count because I did some volunteer teaching at a local Christian high school, and she had me for a class in high school, and she knew the answer, so I can't count her. Other than that, no one ever gave me a good answer. In years, in decades of teaching, no one could tell me why. And that's a serious failure of our educational system. Much of our education, at least in the United States, is filling your heads full of information, names and dates and facts and figures, without explaining to you why. And a good example of that going on in the United States now is they're trying to rename everything that has anyone that had to do with slavery or the wrong side of that war we had 150 years ago. And I think it's because they teach the students now that they kind of taught it to me when I was growing up, it was just a war to end slavery. And it wasn't. It was far more complex than that. And if you understood that, you wouldn't be having this silly notion of renaming stuff after slave owners, which is what they're seriously doing today. Thomas Jefferson owned slaves, and some people are wanting to remove his name from any public buildings, like Jefferson School. It's a silly notion, but I digress. Students generally are not taught why we believe what we believe. They're simply taught what to believe. And the flat earthers are right. They call that indoctrination, and it is. When you tell people what to believe without telling them why, then you're simply indoctrinating them. You're not educating them at all. So that's part of the problem. Our educational system has failed in many respects. Now, when people ask me for evidence that the Earth is a globe, the worst place you could go is go to NASA and point about pictures from outer space. Because my students, they eventually stumble around and somebody would say, well, we have photographs from space that show the Earth is spherical. And I would point out to them, I said, well, when I was born, there were no satellites. I'll go back that far. The first satellite was launched when I was 3 years old. And my parents and my grandparents knew the Earth was a globe. That was long before NASA, long before satellites, long before astronauts. And I think they knew the Earth was a globe. Plus, can you fake photographs? Sure you can. So saying that we have pictures from space is an argument, but it's not the best argument. For one thing, you have to trust the word of other people who took the photographs, that they can be trusted to have not messed with the photographs and edited them. So when I'm asked for good evidence, I say, look, I'm going to give you two classics that go all the way back to Aristotle. 350 BC, he wrote a book called On the Heavens, and early in that book, he gives several arguments why the Earth is a globe. I'm going to share one of them right now with you. This is a photograph of the moon during total lunar eclipse. I took this several years ago. You can see a star to the upper left of the moon there. This was during totality. This was anybody do much photography? Anybody? This is a 13-second exposure, and I used a 3.5-inch Quest star. The aperture is about this big on it, and has a focal length of 1,300 millimeters. Just attach my camera to the back end of that thing, and you're seeing the actual photograph here. This has not been photoshopped, it's not been edited, it's not been cropped. It's exactly what the photograph looked like when it came out of the camera. And the lower part is the deepest part of the eclipse, up near the upper left. That's near the edge of the Earth's umbra, the shadow. And it looks lighter there because it is lighter. The Earth's atmosphere refracts light into the shadow, so the Earth's shadow is not entirely dark. It's like sunset around the Earth, bending that red light of sunset into it. Now, about a half hour before totality, I took this photograph, and I have shrunk this down to get it in. All right, this is the same camera, same telescope, but I've shrunk it down to make it fit. And this is about a half an hour. The moon is moving from upper right to lower left, and as it does, that shadow moves across the moon. Can you see the shape of the Earth's shadow? Well, if you have difficulty, I will show you a photograph I took about a half hour after totality. Now can you see the shape of the Earth's shadow? I hope you all can, but just in case you're a little slow, I'll draw it in for you, okay? It's a circle, all right? And it's a bit bigger than the moon is. I like to think in miles rather than kilometers. Deal with it, okay? The moon is a little over 2,000 miles across. That's about the width of the United States on the continental part, the lower 48. And the Earth's shadow is around 5,000 miles across. So there's like a 5-to-2 ratio there in the sizes. Now, could a round, flat object like this cast a circular shadow? Well, if the light source is coming from that direction, of course it's going to cast. I'm casting a kind of a round shadow right now. You can see if you're close up to this thing. But what happens if I turn it? I get an elliptical shadow or even a line, don't I? So a round, flat object can cast a round shadow, but during this eclipse, somebody I knew was watching the same eclipse from Hawaii, thousands of miles away. And for me, it was midnight, and for him, it was sunset. And so if you've got the sun over here and the Earth here, and the moon here, if he's in one part of the world and I'm in another part of the world, it's not going. If it's flat, it's not going to work. Well, I would be seeing this, and he would be seeing that. So the only shape that consistently casts a circular shadow, regardless of its orientation, is a sphere. Aristotle wrote about that. That was one of his arguments that he used. A second, and by the way, I like using that argument because you don't have to trust anybody. You can do that for yourself. I've seen, I think now, 18 total lunar eclipses and a number of partial lunar eclipses, and I can testify to the fact that every eclipse, the shadow is circular. Anyone can do that. All you have to do is wait until there's a lunar eclipse and check it for yourself. Don't trust me, do your own investigation. Here's another thing you can check for yourself. If you travel around a bit and can navigate around the sky and recognize stars in the sky, the altitude of stars in the northern part of the sky and the southern part of the sky change as you move around. I'll give you an example here. This is a photograph taken at the Ark encounter. This is a half-hour exposure taken at night, obviously. We went down there, this other fellow and I, we got permission to go down there. Since I work there, I can do that. And that took the people in charge there a long time to find switches for the lights. The lights, outside lights, are not on switches like this. You have a circuit breaker somewhere, and they had to go looking for them. And they said, can you get the lights turned off over there? And a half an hour later they did. Can you get these lights turned off? And half an hour, it took us 2 hours or more to get the lights turned off we needed off. So this is a half-hour exposure taken there looking at the bow fin of the Ark encounter. And that bow fin is like 30-some meters above us. It's pretty high up. But there's a little dot at the middle. That little dot is the North Star, or Polaris. The Earth's rotation axis points at it, and so throughout the night, the stars all seem to spin as we look to the north in a counterclockwise direction around that point. And the farther out you get, the bigger the arcs are because you are a larger radius involved there. Now, what many people don't know is the angle that makes with the northern horizon. If you had a compass or a protractor, I should say, or a sextant, and you were pointing it towards that point around the sky, I'll say Polaris. It's not right at that point, but very close to it. The angle that it makes with the northern horizon is equal to your latitude. So what's going to happen if you go farther north? It's going to be higher in the sky. If you go farther south, it's going to be lower in the sky. Now what about stars to the south of you? Well, if you go farther north, the stars in the north will get higher, the stars in the south will get lower. If you go farther south, it'll go the other direction. You can see that, and I'll show this to you. Let this represent the Earth, and let this vertical line represent the Earth's rotation axis. Then you've got a circle around the world, indicated by a line there, halfway between. We call that the equator, right? Now let's give a location like there at the Ark encounter in northern Kentucky. I draw a line from the center of the Earth, and that angle that you make with the equator, that angle like this, that's equal to your latitude, isn't it? That's your definition of latitude. Now, I mentioned last night how the sky looks like a dome to us. Half of it above the horizon and half of it below the horizon. Remember I talked about that last night, the appearance that the sky has? So I can put in a dome there. And it represents what I would see standing there right at that point, at the center of that dome, right there at the end of that latitude marker. And basically everything, there's a plane there indicated by that dashed circle. Anything to the upper right of that plane and up this way and down that way, I can see. But anything off to the lower left, I can't see because the Earth is in the way. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay, now if I draw a line parallel from my location, parallel to the Earth's rotation axis, it's going to point to that direction in the sky around which the stars spin. That is, Polaris will be in that direction, and the North Star will be in that direction. So the sky will seem to spin in a counterclockwise direction around that point. And stars over in the east will rise and set. Stars in the south will rise and set. Stars in the north will go in circles, like you saw in that diagram. Now, what happens if I go farther north? Like up into Canada somewhere. Watch very carefully what's going to happen. Before I get there, I left this one thing out. If I draw a line tangent to the Earth's surface there towards the north, then I've got an angle right there like that. And that angle right there is the same as the angle of my latitude. It's a nice geometry proof. I won't go through that, but you can show that to be the case. Now what happens if I go farther north, say up into Canada? Then it looks like that. Everybody see the difference? I'm farther north now. Let's go back to Kentucky, Canada, Kentucky, Canada, Kentucky, Canada. Or if you will, there's Italy and Norway. Italy, Norway, Italy, Norway. Back and forth like that. You see what's going on? The angle that the North Star will make is going to be higher than it is farther south. And I can't see stars. If you can see, look off to the lower right there. When you're farther south in Kentucky, I can see stars down here that you can't see farther north. In fact, where I used to live in South Carolina, it's about 4 to 5 degrees farther south than where I live now. In the winter months, briefly, I could see the second brightest star in the sky. It's called Canopus. It would just barely get above the horizon. But in Kentucky, I have never seen it because it's too far north and the star is below the horizon all the time. In South Carolina, it gets a little above. By the way, if you go to South America, if you get south of the equator pretty far, the star gets high overhead. And I can show that very quickly here. I'm just going to draw it in for the southern hemisphere. That's what the sky looks like in the southern hemisphere. And you can see the North Star is not visible. It would be up at the top, and that plane there that defines my horizon, what I would see completely blocks it off. This can only happen if the Earth is spherical. It can't happen on a flat Earth. And again, I suggest this as a proof of the Earth's sphericity, because anyone can do this for themselves. You don't have to trust anybody else. If you travel much north and south and you're familiar with star charts, you can actually do this yourself. And don't trust me, check it out for yourself. You want more evidence? Well, in the 2nd century, Pliny the Elder said that the one argument for the Earth's sphericity is the fact that ships disappear hull first as they travel away from us. If a ship leaves port, the bottom disappears and it works higher and higher up. Well, I did this in fall of 2016. I was at Virginia Beach. I don't live near a large body of water, but Virginia Beach is there right on the Chesapeake Bay, which is part of the Atlantic Ocean. There's a major port there. So I spent several hours the afternoon, and I set up the same telescope and the same camera, 1,300 millimeter focal length, and I put my digital camera on there, and this is one of the photographs of one of the ships that I saw. It's a container vessel. You can see that there are like 7 stacks of containers there. And you can see the lettering on the side of the hull there. It's the NYK line. It's a major Japanese shipping firm. If you've ever been around ports or seen any container ships, you've seen their ships. And I'll tell you this much, whenever I've seen their ships, when it's sitting in port, I know that those bottom of the letters don't reach the water line. They're above the water line. But notice about the bottom third or so of those letters are blocked off. They're blocked off by what appears to be a hump of water between me and that ship. I think it's because between me and the ship there's a curve like this, and I can't see over the curve. Now, I watched this ship. The ship was already heading out to sea when I got there. So I kept watching it. Here's a photograph I took later. You can tell it's a little farther out because I've cut these and I've cropped them. But on the other hand, I made sure that I didn't change the size at all. And you can see that that white structure on the ship is smaller appearing than it was. That means it's farther away. Can you see the hull? No, the hull's completely gone. The lettering, the hull is completely gone. About that time, the ship turned. I think it was out in the Atlantic now and was probably turning towards Europe. And all I can see is the stern of the ship. And a little bit later on, all I could see was the very tip top. I couldn't even see the bottom of the structure there and some of those stacks of those tiers of containers. Unfortunately, it was getting pretty late in the day. You can see it's kind of faint and orange. The sun was getting ready to set, and I had to pack up. If I would have kept watching, I would have loved to, but it was getting too dark, and the ship would have disappeared entirely. Now, a few years ago, I was in South Florida, and I did it again. Here is a photograph. This was I was at south of Fort Lauderdale. I was at Hollywood Beach. Just north of there is Port Everglades. And the ship was coming in, and when I first saw it through the telescope, I could see 3 white things, a big broad white thing, and then a smaller one to the left of it, and one farther to the left of that. And I wasn't sure what I was looking at. I guessed that big broad white thing was at the stern of the ship, the back of the ship, and the one on the far left was on the bow, but I didn't know for sure. Well, it was heading toward me and started making the turn to go into Port Everglades. And here it is after a little while. And sure enough, I can now see some of the deck on the bow of the ship. And I can see the deck in the middle and on the stern. I can't see the whole ship yet, but I can see bits and pieces of it there, more than I could before. And here's more of it. And then finally, I could see a part of the hull. This ship was coming toward me. Just the reverse of what I just showed you. As a ship approaches you, it's first the top is visible, then the bottom. As it goes away, the bottom disappears first, and then the top. And here they are, all 4 of them again, in rapid succession. And I've not cropped these. I've not done anything to them. Those are just the sizes that they were in the camera when I spit the pictures out. They've never been edited. Those are the JPEGs that came out. And if you printed them out and started measuring things on it, you could tell that each one in succession, things are getting larger appearing. That means it's getting closer to you. So I've given you a third bit of evidence that, again, anyone can do if they get next to a large port and watch the ships come and go. Now, what's remarkable is that Eratosthenes, in the around 200 BC, we're talking now 2,200 years ago, he not only knew the Earth's shape, but he knew its size as well. How did he do that? Well, he lived in Alexandria, which I mentioned last night, very good place to be. And he was aware, I don't think he witnessed this himself, but somebody had traveled to the south of Egypt down to modern-day Aswan, to a location then called Syene. And there was a deep well down there. Now, if you've ever looked into a deep well, you usually can't see the bottom because sunlight comes in at an angle like this and it casts a shadow on the side, and the bottom never gets any sunlight. The only way you're going to get any sunlight on the bottom of a well is, one, if the well is real shallow, or even more better than that, if you live in the tropics where the sun can be directly overhead. As it turns out, this city is right on the edge of the Tropic of Cancer, right on the edge of the tropics. And so at local noon in June, the sun is directly overhead for just a moment or two. And at that point, you can look down. There's no shadow being cast. There are no shadows of a person standing here. I've only experienced that once in Brazil. I happened to be in Brazil at a latitude at noon where there was no shadow cast, just like this was straight down. But see, in Alexandria, it doesn't happen that way, because in Alexandria, you're hundreds of kilometers north, about 800 kilometers north of the tropics. And Eratosthenes knew this. So what he did is he constructed a gnomon, G-N-O-M-O-N, I believe. And it's a vertical column, either stone or wood. We don't know what he used. But the Greeks were pretty good engineers. And turns out the Romans even better, but they knew how to build things. So he built this vertical column, and he built a flat horizontal surface around it. And at noon on the June solstice, he knew there was a shadow being cast. Here is the gnomon standing here. Here's the flat surface. There's a right angle right here. The sunlight comes down and casts a shadow down here, and you've got a right triangle. Now, since he designed this gnomon, he knew exactly how tall it was, and all he had to do at local noon was measure the length of the shadow. So now you have the two legs of a right triangle, and I'm sure in this group I don't have to tell you, you know everything about that triangle now, don't you? Just apply basic trigonometry, which is what he did. Now today we would express that angle here at the top in terms of degrees, but back then they used fractions of a circle. Turned out to be 1/50th of a circle, which is about 7.2 degrees. Now, you know you got the parallel rays coming in from the upper right, and if you do a perpendicular, which are those two dotted lines, the two perpendiculars will intersect at the Earth's center. And you've got the same angle at the Earth's center as you have up there at the top of this gnomon, 1/50th of a circle, or 7.2 degrees. So all you have to do, you know that arc length now, and the arc length, if you take the arc length and divide it by the radius of the Earth in this case, you get the angle in radians. So all he had to do was take the distance between those two cities, the arc length, multiply it by 50, and it gives you the circumference of the Earth. Pretty brilliant, wasn't it? How do you find the distance between those two cities? Well, there's something I've not told you about Eratosthenes. He is known as the father of geography because he coined that term. And he commissioned surveying and map making, and by doing this across Egypt and other places, he knew the distance between those two cities, north-south, pretty well, actually. And when he did this calculation, he expressed it in a unit called a stadian. Now, there are two stadia being used at the time. If he used the more commonly used stadian, his answer is correct within about 20%. Not bad. However, if he used the less commonly used one, his answer was within 0.5% of the correct value. Are you impressed with this result? I tell people, if you're not impressed with this result, then you haven't followed it at all. Because this is mind-blowing to me. It's tremendous. Not only did people know 22 centuries ago how the shape of the Earth, but they knew its size as well. And this information was pretty well known in the Western world. So how did this flat Earth myth arise that everybody thought the world was flat? Well, very quickly, there are three developments that took place in the 19th century that played a part in it. In the 19th century, the British, they kind of invented archaeology as we know it. They developed the techniques that are still used today. And since they had a major control in Egypt and in Mesopotamia at the time, they did a lot of archaeology. And when they went to particularly Mesopotamia, they discovered what I put in quotes there, the cosmology of the ancient Near East. And they said that the ancient Near East, they taught that the world was round and flat like this plate, and that there was a dome over top of it. That became the cosmology of the ancient Near East. Now, I think in some respects they may have misunderstood what they were looking at. It'd be like if somebody did a excavation 1,000 years from now of the planetariums we have. They're flat floors with a dome over top. Would they conclude that we thought that was no, they wouldn't. Hopefully they wouldn't conclude that. But as it turns out, this wasn't the cosmology of the ancient Near East anyway. They discovered several others. It was just an example of one cosmology from the ancient Near East. But that idea stuck with some people for some reason. Now, also in the 19th century was the documentary hypothesis, the notion that Moses, if he existed at all, didn't write the Pentateuch. Somebody wrote it 1,000 years later. Several people wrote it either during the Babylonian captivity or shortly thereafter. Now, you ought to recognize that this is nothing less than a direct assault upon the authority and inspiration of Scripture, which is what it was all about. They were trying to explain where the Bible came from in terms of human action. So they were teaching this then in some of the seminaries and so forth and in academia. Conservative theologians, for the most part, did not accept this. But the reasoning was, when they were in Babylon, 1,000 years after Moses, if Moses existed at all, that they picked up the creation myth from them. So Genesis 1 and 2, that came out of Babylonian mythology. And they also picked up the flood epic, the flood myth from the Gilgamesh epic. You see, the Genesis was just a collection of stories that were put together. Again, this is completely contrary to what we know Scripture really is. And so you get these pictures showing that this is the cosmology of the Bible. You got this flat earth with a dome over top and water's right above it and the stars attached to it. And this was being sold as the cosmology the Bible teaches. And it's been resurrected in the last 30 years by Paul Seeley and the late Michael Heiser. Do you know those names? And then John Walton has pushed this too. But Michael Heiser was going around and he was saying that this is the cosmology of the Bible. This is the cosmology the Bible teaches. And Michael Heiser was very confused on this because I believe Michael Heiser claimed to believe in the authority and inspiration of Scripture. And how can you believe in the authority and inspiration of Scripture if you think the first chapter of Genesis contains a major error? If someone thinks they understand that, please explain it to me, because I can't understand that. Michael Heiser was doing the devil's work. And by the way, the flat earthers love Michael Heiser. They take these diagrams and use them, even though Michael Heiser was not a flat earther. The third thing is what's called the conflict thesis. This developed in the 19th century. It was the idea that Christianity held back progress. It was war between Christianity and progress. And the exhibit A in this whole thing was the earth was thought to be flat because the Bible said so. The church throughout the Middle Ages taught the earth is flat. And and what they were doing is they were trying to sell this to people. They were telling the people in the church, look, you got the shape of the earth wrong. You have a chance now to redeem the church by getting in on the ground floor of Darwinism. It was based entirely on a lie because the church never taught that, because the Bible doesn't teach the earth is flat. But it worked. There were many theologians and pastors who started accommodating Darwinism based upon this lie that was put forth. And that's for the whole story about the church teaching the earth is flat. The church never taught the earth is flat. It's just a big lie. And here's a good example of what I'm talking about. This is a depiction of day 2 creation. You see Jesus there as the creator. And you can see the earth there surrounded by something and then water above that. That's day 2 creation. I talked about this last night. Question: what is the shape of the earth there? It's a sphere, isn't it? Now this depiction of this comes from a Bible from around 1350. That predates Columbus's voyage by nearly a century and a half. How do we know when this thing came about? Well, it belonged to King John II of France. And in the Battle of Poitiers, the English won handedly, and as part of the war prize, they confiscated this Bible from him. And it's been in continual hands of the English ever since. The French haven't ever asked it for it back, I guess. And we know exactly when that battle took place, September 19th, 1356. So we can only guess that the Bible dates a few years before that. And there are many other depictions from the Middle Ages that show this. Now, a key figure in this whole mess is a man named Samuel Rowbottom. He was an Englishman who lived in the 19th century, and he performed what's called the Bedford Level experiment. The Bedford Level on the east side of England, it's a relatively flat area. Flat is conforming to the Earth's sphericity. There's no vertical gradient to speak of, I'll put it that way. And there's a river there that's been straightened out a little bit, and it goes for 6 miles in a straight line with a bridge or two across the thing. And so what he did is he waded out into the water, and at point A, and you'll see there a little guy in the water, they're here in the water, he's got a telescope. And here's the idea: if the Earth is a sphere 25,000 miles in circumference or 40,000 kilometers in circumference, then if you're 8 inches above the water, then your vision would be tangent to the Earth 1 mile away. So you can see he's looking to the left, and 1 mile away at point T, that tangent point, his vision is going to be blocked by virtue of being 8 inches above. 8 inches, about that much. All right? Now, he paid a guy to take a boat with a big white banner on it and row from his position to the other end. Remember, it's 6 miles long from point A to point B. So when he gets to point T, none of the boat would be blocked because he's before that tangent line. But once he passes point T, the boat should be going over the curve, and the boat should gradually disappear. How much should it disappear? By the time he reaches point B, there should be 24 feet of drop there. 24 feet is what, about 7 meters? And the boat was only about 6 feet high, 8 feet high. So the boat should entirely disappear. But Rowbottom said he saw the boat the entire way. Hence, the Earth must be flat. Remember the pictures I showed you before, the 2 ships? I showed you something very different, didn't I? He's claiming something very different. Who's telling the truth? Well, maybe we both are, but his conclusion is wrong. You see, there's something very important he left out, is atmospheric refraction caused by a temperature inversion. And if you deal with flat earthers, they're going to throw this question up to you, these kind of questions. They say, we see too far, and if you say the R word, refraction, usually they're going to laugh at you because they're so indoctrinated, they absolutely refuse to believe that atmospheric refraction is a thing. But again, I think all of you have physics education. Even if you just have an undergraduate degree in physics, you know enough about optics to know that refraction is very real. And you probably know about temperature inversions, but I'll go over it very quickly with you again. You know, on the surface of the Earth, the temperature is usually, the air is usually the warmest. And as you rise in elevation, it gets cooler and cooler. If you've been in the mountains here in Germany or in Switzerland, you know what I'm talking about, right? It gets cooler as you go higher. But on warm spring and summer days, a large body of water, such as an ocean or a sea, generally is much cooler than the air temperature. Have you noticed that if you go to the beach? The water is always cooler than the air temperature during summer and spring. And that's because you know that there's a very high specific heat that water has. I think it's the highest of any substance that I know of. There may be 1 or 2 things that have higher, but I don't know what they are. It's very high. But air has a pretty low specific heat, and there's not a lot of material there anyway. So air, its temperature can rise and fall pretty quickly. And so when that air is in contact with the water, it gets chilled. And you can end up with, say, 5 or 10 Celsius temperature difference here with cooler air here and warmer air above. And then above that, it becomes a lower temperature again. Now, it turns out since cooler air will sink, a temperature inversion is very stable. It will stay there for quite a while. So on many warm summer and spring days, there's a temperature inversion over the water. And so if you send a light ray from that boat back to the right, that red line shows you the light ray going like that. In order for it to proceed, it must actually increase elevation and climb up out of that temperature inversion, mustn't it? The problem is the speed of light is slower in cooler air than it is in warmer air. And so since it's hitting that interface between the two at a grazing angle, it gets bent back down into that denser medium. Instead of being a straight line, that red arrow will curve, and it can do it for many, many kilometers like that. And there are flat earthers who do this sort of experiment today, and they say we see too far. Well, they go out on warm spring and summer days. How many people want to go to the beach on warm spring and summer days? Everybody does. How many people are up for going to the beach on a cold autumn or winter day? No hands will go up. If you've ever been to the beach on a cold autumn or winter day, you know how miserable it is. Remember when I went to Virginia Beach? It was in early November, about this time of year, 7 years ago. Now I'm going to do it in Fahrenheit because I'm not bothered to change it to Celsius. Again, deal with it. All you have to know is the differences. The air temperature when I did this was 50 degrees. It dropped to 49 before the afternoon ended. The water temperature, I looked it up, was 62 degrees. That's a difference of 12 degrees. That's about 6-7 degrees Celsius. There was no temperature inversion, was there? And I was miserable because, at the beach it's always windy. Well, it was cold and it was windy and it was damp and it was miserable. The thing is, the flat earthers don't do it right. They go out on the comfortable days. They don't go out on the uncomfortable days. But it gets worse. Here's a modern example. This is from Joshua Nowicki. I tell you, he's not a flat earther. Repeat, not a flat earther, but he's an incredible photographer. And here you have a picture of the Chicago skyline. The Willis Tower, formerly the Sears Tower, is that tall building off to the left. Now, that's not so unusual, except when you consider where he took it. He took this from Grand Mare State Park in the state of Michigan, across Lake Michigan. And the distance is about 100 kilometers. 56 miles, I believe. And from that distance, the entire skyline should be below the horizon. The earth must be flat, right? Well, no, Joshua Nowicki is not convinced of that. What happens is he's a very good photographer and he understands refraction very well. He knows optics and he knows when they take these kind of pictures. And would you agree that this is a provocative photo? Because you're seeing something you're not supposed to see, but you're seeing it. It's a very provocative photo. If you take a photograph from this place and you don't have atmospheric refraction, you're not going to see the skyline. All you're going to see is water out there. That's not a very interesting photograph, is it? This is. He doesn't get this kind of result all the time. He does get it, though, at certain times, and he knows when to do it because he knows what he's doing. Flat earthers generally don't. Now, by the way, he's put some of these into a time-lapse thing, and the city bobs up and down like this. And that only happens if you've got variable stuff going on like refraction. It can't happen if this is flat earth truth. And again, contrast with my earlier photos, again, I don't see this in my ship photos that I took because I didn't do it on a day. I don't live near a large body of water. I would love to get a photograph like that sometime, but I never have. Every time I tell flat earthers, they say, what about these experiments? I say, well, every time I do it, you say, don't trust other people, do this yourself. I do it myself, and I get results consistent with the globe Earth. And they're kind of surprised because they haven't done this themselves. They just trust other people. And here's where it really gets bad. This is called the black swan photo. Do you know what the black swan argument is? The idea when Europeans were convinced that all swans were white. That was just given until some explorers a couple hundred years ago discovered there were in New Guinea, I believe, there were black swans. All it takes is one example to disprove a general rule. All right, all it takes. I mean, we have a stereotype in our country about German people. You know what the stereotype is? You're all blonde. I don't know how that got started, but there's not a single blonde person in the room as far as I can tell. I could take any one of you to disprove this idea that all Germans have blonde hair. Just one example, all it takes. But it's an inclusive all statement, right? Universal statement. Well, they took this photograph. A guy took it back in 2016, I believe, a flat earther. He's at the beach in Southern California. He said he placed his camera 1 foot above the water, which is about that high. And he looked at these 2 oil platforms out there. The one on the right is Platform Hill House. It's a little over 6 miles. That's about 10 kilometers. And then the platform Habitat is about 9.41 miles. That's a bit more, 16 or 17 kilometers out. And from that height above the water, the horizon should lie in front of those 2 platforms. And when you look at this photograph, it almost looks like the horizon is beyond them. Hence, the earth must be flat. And they put there, bye-bye ball, bye-bye ball. This is from a Flat Earth website. Now, I know, look at those cranes on the leftmost one, Platform Habitat. Do you notice those cranes? They look kind of wavy like this. You ever seen a crane like that? Maybe in a Salvador Dali portrait you might see that, but not in the real world, are you? What is that? What caused that? Well, I think it's atmospheric refraction causing that, differential refraction. Well, what's interesting, and by the way, this has been trumpeted for several years. This is the proof, the number one proof that flat earthers put out there. The black swan photo proves that the earth is flat. Except if you go back and watch the original video, which I've done several times, if you go back and look at the original video, I did this screenshot. You ready for this screenshot? This is a screenshot off the same video. Same platforms, same location, except, whoa, part of the Platform Hill House is blocked and all of the bottom of Habitat. In fact, what you're seeing here is exactly what you would see if the earth is a globe 40,000 kilometers in circumference. Same video. Also notice that you don't get this wavy pattern on the cranes there, do you? They're nice and straight like they're supposed to be, telling me there wasn't much atmospheric refraction on this. Now, what's interesting? So which one's correct? Well, it gets worse, as I said. This is what he had to say about, this is the video. This is another, I took the screenshot. I'm going to take a screenshot when he's describing this. And it's kind of garbled, but you get the idea. This is what he said about this photograph. He said, most days, normal visibility of platforms and boats will appear they are behind the horizon curvature of Earth. Again, it's kind of chopped up English. I don't know if it's not his primary language, but what he's saying is, on most days, I see this, which is evidence that the earth is a globe. Most days. He admits it most of the time. What's he say about the other one? This one? Once in a while, not very often, there will be days when conditions are right to see full image. Yeah. It's called cherry picking. Do you have that term in German as well? Yeah, what the flat earthers have done here is they've thrown away 99% of the evidence and kept the 1% that they like. And I don't understand their reasoning. If they really think just one counterexample will disprove it all, I don't know. I really don't know. But I'm mystified by this because there's clearly, people that are used to doing science, real science, and dealing with real data, you know that's not the right way to do things, and yet this is the way flat earthers approach the world. So Samuel Rowbottom, I digressed a little bit there, but Samuel Rowbottom started this movement in the late 19th century, and it grew very rapidly. There was a zetetic society. He used the word zetetic to describe his approach to things, testing things for oneself. The zetetic society was birthed there in England, and it had many members. And then there were South Africans who were flat earthers, Americans who were flat earthers, Australians, all around the world, all around the globe, there were flat earthers. Rowbottom dies, a few other people die. In the early 20th century, the movement began to really wane. And eventually it was relegated to being silliness, and there have been several flat earth societies over the years, and some of those have been tongue-in-cheek operations. At one time, the Flat Earth Society had far more globe earthers as members. There were a lot of college professors whose students signed them up as a gag on these things. And unfortunately, in the early 21st century, somebody discovered some of these writings from more than 100 years ago and began to put them forth on YouTube and social media. And that is a bane on society because, I don't know if you've been following this much at all, but there's a lot of fake stuff on YouTube and social media out there. It used to be if you wanted to promulgate false ideas, it was very expensive. Maybe you'd write a book and you'd spend a lot of money publishing the book, but then you had to get in the hands of people. You had to almost force libraries to accept your book. Very expensive. But now, at virtually no expense at all, a person can put together a video and put it on YouTube, and you can get millions of views. And there are all sorts of false things that are being promulgated out there on the internet, and flat earth is just one of them. So we have a bunch of YouTube certified flat earth scientists out there because they're doing what they call science on these things. And you'll see oftentimes bumper stickers and statements from flat earthers, research flat earth, research flat earth, research flat earth. And I think what they mean by that is watch a bunch of YouTube videos. That's what they mean from a guy who knows even less than you do. Because if you really tested these things for yourself, you would find out they're lying to you. I mean, again, I've tried this experiment myself looking for we see too far, and every time I do it, I don't get the results flat earthers claim to get. And again, I share that with flat earthers, they really don't have much to say. Really? They're kind of surprised because they thought everybody got those kind of results. And within the flat earth movement, there's a broad range of beliefs. When I first started investigating this 7 years ago, I thought maybe it's all just biblical. Thank you. He gave me the signal, finally. When I get wound up and I get going fast, I apologize. Thank you for the admonishment. I need it. My wife's not here. So when I started investigating this flat earth movement 7 years ago, I first assumed that they were coming from it from a biblical viewpoint. I found out that's not right. There's a huge segment of flat earthers who are claiming to be Christian people and believe the Bible, but there are Hindus, there are Buddhists, there are Muslim flat earthers, there are some atheist flat earthers, there's some Mormon flat earthers, Catholic flat earthers, they're all over the place. But I think I know my concern is primarily with the church because I see them twist Scripture miserably. I see them use arguments that we creationists use. They abuse our arguments, they repeat our arguments and do a very poor job of it. I sometimes think that the flat earth movement was unleashed on the world to be a parody of creation scientists, to kind of make fun of us, to show how bad it is. In fact, when I've criticized flat earthers in some of my articles, some of my blogs and I've done, I've had some people take my articles and substitute creation for flat earth and say the argument works both ways, they say. So I think there are people out there trying to do this to us. But I want to take a look at a few of the biblical passages they claim. And there are lists out there of 200 Bible passages that teach the earth is flat, 240 that teach the earth is flat. Somebody 130 years ago said there were 400 passages. I've not seen his list though, but I have seen the 200 list and the 240 list, and I've gone through them and I've dealt with some of them. I'll deal with a few of these. For instance, they say the rakia of day 2 indicates the earth is flat. And I don't follow it all. As I pointed out last night, its purpose was to separate waters above from waters below. And the luminaries were placed there on day 4, and it was translated firmament. The only thing I can figure is that they figure the firmament must be something hard, and I dealt with that last night. So you got this hard dome, not a sphere, but a dome, and the dome fits in nicely over a flat earth. And it gets back to the supposed cosmology of the ancient Near East. And again, I pointed out that a better translation of that, because that's what the word means, is expanse. So the only way, you can't go to day 2 and find any mention of the earth's shape, spherical or flat or any other shape. All you can do is adopt the cosmology, interpret that, and then force that meaning onto the passage, which is a really bad example of eisegesis, not exegesis. Another thing they point out, and this is on the list as well, they say the earth was made before the sun. Genesis 1 and 2, and 14 and 18. Well, how do you get the earth is flat out of that? I mean, I'm honest, folks. These are passages that they're listed as saying teaching the earth is flat, and it doesn't. I happen to believe that the earth was made before the sun because that's what the Bible teaches. But I don't believe the earth is flat. How do you get there from there? I don't know. I really don't understand their reasoning. Look, if the Bible teaches the earth is flat, and it's so clear that it does, wouldn't you think that somewhere in the Bible there's a passage that reads something like this, the earth is flat? I suspect that many of you have read the entire Bible, maybe more than once, and you won't find anything like that anywhere. So how in the world can you say it so clearly teaches the earth is flat if it's not even in there at all? The problem is, the answer to that question is that flat earthers choose to read passages, verses a certain way, to mean flat earth. They then impose that meaning onto it. It becomes the only possible meaning you can have. And so if you don't agree with them on this meaning, then you don't believe the Bible. And I've had people look me in the eye and tell me that. I had a guy just less than 2 weeks ago who called me a name because you don't believe the Bible. You don't teach the Bible. We've had people write to Answers in Genesis. They said, we've supported you in the past. We're not going to support you anymore because you don't teach the Bible cosmology. We get letters and emails from people. And our speakers go out and speak, and we regularly get this question. And Peter, you said you've gotten questions about it. The movement's well and strong in the United States. I don't know, I have no idea of how bad it is might be in Germany, but I know there are German flat earthers, or have to be. And so we need to address this very carefully. Now, one of the things they accuse us of, they say, well, you claim to believe everything in the Bible is literal, but you don't literally believe Genesis on the cosmology of the Bible. Well, that's beside the point, but let me ask you this question. Is everything in the Bible literal? Well, no, there are figures of speech and idioms in the Bible. Now, in English, we have a phrase, you're pulling someone's leg. Do you know what that phrase means? It doesn't mean that I come over here and I grab you and I do this, okay? I'm literally pulling his leg, but when I say I'm pulling someone's leg, what does that mean? Anybody know what that idiom means in English? It means you're joking, you're fooling somebody. I'm trying to tell you something that isn't true. I'm just playing with you. Do you have an equivalent statement in German? I've been told that taking you in your arms, or taking him by the arm, which one is it? On the arm. Taking him on the arm? I've been told, what's that mean? Pull their arm? Or does it mean to hug them? What does it mean? I don't. But I've been told taking me in your arms, that's what I'm told. So again, it makes no sense in English any more than pulling one's leg makes no sense in German. So we have idioms and figures of speech, and the Bible has many of those in there. There are similes. You all know what a simile is, right? It's a comparison to something using like or as. And Jesus told a lot of similes. We call them what? The parables. He said, the kingdom of heaven is like. And so it goes. Then there are metaphors, which is a comparison but done in a more literal sense. For instance, the Last Supper of the Gospel of John tells us about Jesus telling his disciples, I think it's in John 14, that I am the vine and you are the branches. And then he started talking about pruning those branches and bearing fruit. Does that mean the disciples walked around with grapes hanging off of them? No. They understood that was a metaphor. Jesus said he was the door, a door of a sheepfold. Was he? Not literally. He said he's the bread of life. Was he? Not literally. He said he was the light of the world. Well, literally? No, I don't think so. And on it goes. There are many metaphors that even in the Gospels you have, but people generally understand what those metaphors mean. And then there are the poetic and the prophetic books. And they are jam full of allegorical things and symbolic things. For instance, the book of Revelation has a lot of things in it. You start reading it, and I think most of them would realize a lot of these things are symbolic of things. What they mean, I don't know. I don't know if anybody knows. Old Testament the same way. A lot of things that are metaphorical and allegorical. And some people get really worried. They say, wait a minute, if you admit that something isn't literal in the Bible, then doesn't that open the door up for just reinterpreting everything in figurative senses? Like maybe they're not 6 days of normal days of creation. Well, no, it's not like that at all. You see, there are different genres in Scripture. I gave you the poetic and the prophetic books, but then there are historical books. The first 17 books of the Bible are historical in nature, and those allegorical and symbolic themes are largely absent in those. And when it does have an account of that, you can pretty well figure it out. It's not that difficult to tell what genre you're dealing with, even outside of the original language. And when I read the English translation of the Bible, I can usually understand what kind of genre it's talking about. I'm sure in German it's the same way. So you shouldn't be afraid of people misunderstanding these things, because it's not that difficult to tell. Here's an example, Isaiah 40:22. This is one that they use. It is he who sits above the circle of the earth, and its inhabitants are like grasshoppers, who stretches out the heavens like a curtain and spreads them like a tent to dwell in. And they say, see here, the flat earthers say, look at that. It says circle. This is a circle. A globe is not a circle. Hence, the Bible teaches the earth is flat and round. By the way, when you introduced me, you mentioned about, is the earth flat or round? Well, the flat earthers would say, yes, it is. It's flat and round. It's just not, it's a two-dimensional round, not a three-dimensional round. And so they have this flat earth Bible, a flat earth understanding. You've got Isaiah 40:22 inscribed on that. And notice what it's shaped like. It's flat and round. And at the middle, you have the North Pole. And you can see North America off to the lower right and South America below that, and a little bit of Antarctica. Beyond that, you see Asia and Europe, past the center, Africa and Australia. As you get farther and farther out, well, there is no South Pole, is there? Nor is Antarctica a continent lying at the bottom of the globe, the southern part of the globe. Instead, they don't show all of it here, but they show a lot of it. Antarctica, rather than being a continent around the South Pole of the Earth, where there is no South Pole, it is a wall of ice that surrounds the planet, or the Earth. Don't call it a planet, it's the Earth. Now, if you ever wondered, you've asked, well, flat earthers, if the Earth is flat, why doesn't the water fall off the edge? Well, the answer is easy. You've got an ice wall right there. That lip right here represents the ice wall. It's that ice wall that holds the water in. I guess if it weren't for that, the oceans would drain off, I suppose. That's the answer. That's the question people ask. Well, the Earth is flat. Why is it that the water doesn't run off? Well, the answer is the ice wall holds it in. You understand? By the way, there's a dome over top of that flat Earth. By the way, the Hebrew word there used is hug, and I have heard people in the past, like Henry Morris and John Wickham, and I've even used it myself, they say that word hug refers to the earth being spherical. So it's saying Isaiah, written in the 8th century, I think BC, is saying that the earth is a globe. And the flat earthers say, no, it means it's a circle. It's a two-dimensional, not three-dimensional round. So when I get contradictory arguments about the Hebrew, I go to the world-class Hebraist I know and I ask them, what does this word mean? Does it mean something that's circular or something that's spherical? And they tell me, yes. You know, prior to the rise of the flat earth movement, if you ask the average person, and I know this growing up, if you ask the average person what shape the earth is, they would say it is round. They're meaning round in a three-dimensional sense, not round in a two-dimensional sense. Well, it turns out the word hug refers to something round. It's very good to I don't know what German word you have, but the English word round can refer to something that's two-dimensional, round, or three-dimensional. It's ambiguous. It really is ambiguous. So I wish I could claim this as an argument that the Bible teaches the earth as a globe, but it honestly prevents me from doing that. Unfortunately, the flat earthers are not honest like I am. They claim it must mean a circle. By the way, they say that there's another Hebrew word that does mean ball. The word is dur. And they say that Isaiah could have used that in this passage to mean ball if he meant it to be a ball. For instance, the word dur does occur elsewhere in the book of Isaiah. And it's translated ball. The Lord is telling Israel, I will toss you like a ball into a field. And they say, aha, Isaiah could have used a word that means ball, but he didn't. He used hug instead. So therefore, that proves that it's a two-dimensional circle, round and flat, so the Bible teaches the earth is flat. Well, that's good, and it's true to a point, but it turns out the word doer appears twice in Isaiah, not once. And indeed, one time it's translated as a ball, but when you look at the other one, they never talk about this one. That word is talking about encircling a city and besieging Jerusalem. Let me ask you, if you besiege a city, do you do it in a three-dimensional round or a two-dimensional round? Always in a two-dimensional round. So they're not even consistent. The word doer, they claim, means ball, can mean ball, just like who can mean ball, but it can also mean it just means round is what it means. So it's ambiguous. And then they say, what about the four corners of the earth? They say, Isaiah 11:12, he will raise a signal of the nations and will assemble the banished of Israel and gather the dispersed of Judah from the four corners of the earth. And in the book of Revelation, the second time it occurs here, both Old and New Testament, Hebrew and Greek. After this I saw four angels standing at the four corners of the earth, holding back the four winds of the earth, that no wind might blow on the earth or sea or against any tree. They say, aha, the Bible clearly teaches that the earth has four corners, and tell me, where are there corners on a ball? There are no corners on the ball, so therefore the Bible teaches that the earth is flat. I can't believe they actually used that argument. I really can't. Well, I mentioned, so which is it? Is it round or is it flat? Is it round or is it square? Well, Orlando Ferguson in the 1890s came up with this idea. And you've got both square and a round earth. You see the angels there in the corners. And I call this the roulette wheel model because it's kind of lowered and dimpled there in the middle. It looks like a roulette wheel, doesn't it? And I've had social media interactions with a few flat earthers, and I bring up this passage comes up, and they always give me this image. And I say, do you really think that's what the world looks like? And usually they'll say, well, no. I said, well, why did you send me that image if you don't believe that's it? Well, somebody asked me, I usually don't talk about this, but they say, well, what does the four corners refer to? Notice in Revelation it talks about the four winds, four angels there with the winds blowing. I think it's an idiomatic expression which refers to the four cardinal directions, north, south, east, and west. And if you consult a very good, complete weather forecast, it'll give you things like temperature, humidity, dew point, all this kind of stuff. And they usually will give you the wind direction and speed. It'll be out of the southwest, for instance. We still use that. And by the way, the four corners of the earth has transferred from a Hebrew or even Greek idiom into the English as an idiom. We talk about the four corners of the earth referring to the remotest parts of the earth. I don't know if you have it in German, we definitely have it in English. What about the ends of the earth? It's used 28 times, ends of the earth. They say on a globe you can go around and around and around and around, never reach an edge, never reach an end, but if the earth is round and flat, you have an end, don't you? So 28 times the Bible says the earth has an end of the earth, so therefore the earth must be shaped like this. Well, let's just examine two of them, okay? The first one I want to talk about is Isaiah 67:7. He said, God shall bless us, let all the ends of the earth fear him. Question, can geography fear the Lord? No, only people can fear the Lord. It's not talking about some geographical end of the earth. It's talking about people somewhere. What about this one? Isaiah 45:22. Turn to me and be saved, all the ends of the earth, for I am God and there is no other. Can real estate be saved? No, again, it's talking about people. It's an idiomatic expression referring to people living at the remotest parts of the earth. And again, that idiom is transferred into English. Daniel 4 talks about a tree. Daniel 4:11. The tree grew and became strong, and its top reached to heaven, and it was visible to the end of the whole earth. They say on a sphere, if a tree grew up, no matter how tall it got, at best, half the earth can see it. But if you have a tree on the flat earth, people can see it from all over the place. So the earth must be flat. Well, hold on a minute. The first before that tells you what's going on. It says, the vision of my head as I lay in my bed were these. I saw and behold a tree in the midst of the earth, and its height was great. Folks, this tree that was visible from the whole earth is in a dream. And I don't know about you, but my dreams are pretty, by the way, several times it said it's a dream, it's a dream, it's a dream. It's pretty much known it's a dream. My dreams are pretty wild, nothing realistic about them. It's also the dream of a pagan king, Nebuchadnezzar. And the tree, as it turns out, isn't a tree at all. It simply represents the tree as Daniel interpreted for them. And that interpretation, by the way, was fulfilled. So there literally was a king Nebuchadnezzar and a Daniel. The king literally had a dream. This is what the dream was. And Daniel literally interpreted the dream for him. And that dream was literally fulfilled. It's a very literal account. The problem is they're trying to milk a meaning that's not there at all. It's not teaching cosmology. And it's not even clear if this idea of the tree being visible from the whole earth reflected the cosmology of Nebuchadnezzar. He might have thought the world was a globe. We don't know. The flat earth model looks like this. It's got a dome. It's got the flat earth, the North Pole in the middle, as I've already shown. So you might realize if this dome is spinning around like this, then the sun is perpetually above the horizon, isn't it? So how in the world do you get day and night on a flat earth? You see the problem? The sun's always above the horizon. Well, they have answers for everything. Not very good answers, but they have answers. And this is what they say. They say that the sun is like a spotlight shining down. It's got a conical thing here. And when you're underneath that cone of light, it's daylight. And when it goes around away from you, it's night. It goes like this, going around and around and around. You see the sun there and you see the moon. Now, I tested this claim back 7 years ago. What I did, and I already knew the answer to this, because I've been looking at the sun all of my life through telescopes. I've been doing this for over 50 years. I think I know what I'm doing. But if I'm here and the sun's doing this, then the sun at noon, local noon, will be closer to me than when it's early in the morning or late in the day. So what should happen to the apparent size of the sun? It should be small in the morning, get larger in the middle of the day, and get smaller later in the day. So I went out, and I'm not going to give you the details on this. It turns out the height doesn't matter, but I did this on August 3rd, 2016, so it's been 7 years ago. And I took a photograph. I had to put a filter on the same telescope again, but a solar filter, because it's way too bright to look at otherwise. And when it was 7:30 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time, and the sun was only 8 degrees up. I had to wait until 8 degrees because there's some trees in the way, and the trees were going to block my view earlier than that. And I came back at local noon, several hours later, and the sun was 63 degrees up. And by simple math anyone can do, the second photograph should have been, the second image should have been 6.4 times larger. That's a basic fact of mathematics, trigonometry. So here are the two photographs. Early in the morning, you see a tree there partially blocking the lower right. Same ISO, same exposure time. I didn't want to make the photographs identical. The sun's pretty red here because you know the rising sun is reddened. Here it is in the afternoon, and you can see readily that the second one's 6.4 times larger, can't you? I've printed them out and measured them. They're the same size. The sun doesn't change its size. Other false claims. They say the North Star is visible well into the southern hemisphere. It's not. I've been to the southern hemisphere too many times. The circular pattern of stars in the sky can only happen on a flat Earth. If you got the location there and the stars are going around in a circle like that above the flat Earth, because it rotates around the North Pole, it goes like this. If you're right at the North Pole, it's going to look circular. But what if you're off to the side? It's going to look like that, isn't it? I mimicked this in our planetarium. I went in and took a 30-second exposure with the stars spinning around the dome. I set the camera up near the bottom edge of the dome, but off to the side. And can you see the elliptical pattern? That's what you get on a flat Earth. That's what you get on a real Earth. This is what you get on a spherical Earth. Again, this claim is false. I don't have time to talk about these. If you're going to believe the Earth is flat, then you must believe there's a huge conspiracy behind it. You know, all the people at NASA, the astronauts, are all faking it. And maybe the scientists too, and heads of state, a lot of people in on it. Who's behind it all ultimately? Well, there are three common people accused. The Freemasons are behind it all. They've been the whipping boy for a very long time. The Jesuits are behind it. Never mind the fact that Roman Catholics and Masons don't get along. You can't be a Roman Catholic and be a Mason. Or maybe the Jews are behind it, but you can't be a Mason and be a Jew. It's changed now maybe, but for the longest time they excluded both Jews and Catholics. So you got three groups here that don't really get along very well, but there are some people believe one or the other, or all three are somehow behind it. And the Jews, the latter part, Edward Hendry has written 2 books on this. His first book, he's a major proponent of the Jews being behind it, and his greatest lie on earth, proof that our world is not a moving globe. In there, he goes on for 150 pages with some of the most vile anti-Semitism I have ever read. It made me sick to read it. And I took a list of like 25 of these statements I grabbed from it to a discussion group of flat earthers. It's run not by flat earthers, but flat earthers are part of this discussion group. And I said, would any of you care to denounce this position? They wouldn't. I came back and I said, you got a list of some pretty anti-Semitic remarks there. Would you please condemn them? And they wouldn't. I asked them again and again. I begged, I pleaded, please condemn this. One guy said, well, I'm sure there are some globe earthers who've said some anti-Semitic things. And I said, fine, give me an example of one, and I will denounce him so fast it'll make your head swim. That's a common phrase we use in English. And he didn't respond. And after pleading and begging for days, I finally said, look, folks, I can only conclude that since you will not condemn it, you must agree with it. And they wouldn't even talk about that. So there's a very strong anti-Semitic thread running through flat earthism. And it's alarming to me, very alarming. I will skip over his quotes. I'm running out of time. I want to wrap it up here. If the earth is flat, then nothing can orbit the earth because there's a dome sitting over the earth. By the way, gravity doesn't exist. What they mean by that is Newtonian or GR, gravity doesn't work. Things fall, but they fall for a different reason than what you think. They know better than you. They know more about things than you do. The moon doesn't orbit the earth. It goes around in a spin like this. And by the way, moonrise, moonset, stars rising and setting, that's all an illusion on the earth. They don't really set at all. There are no satellites. There are no astronauts. They call them astronauts, N-O-T-S. I think it's very clever. And we haven't been to the moon because, well, the moon isn't a thing you can walk around on anyway. They don't know what the moon is, but they know it's not this ball of rock 250,000 miles away. Well, the thing is, there have been at least 2 Christians that walked on the moon, the late Jim Irwin and Charlie Duke. I never met Jim Irwin, but I know Charlie Duke. He was from my adopted hometown of Lancaster, South Carolina. So I contacted Charlie a few years ago and I said, would you give me a testimony? He said, sure, I will. This is what he wrote for me. He said, I was a lunar module pilot for the Apollo 16 mission to the moon. We left the Kennedy Space Center in 1972. We left Earth orbit for our 3-day trip to the moon about 3 hours later. As we maneuvered our spacecraft to dock with our lunar module, the Earth came into view about 20,000 miles away. It was an awesome sight. As you can see in the photo, the Earth is obviously a sphere and not a flat circle. As we journeyed to the moon, we could look out our window and see a smaller Earth, and each time we could see different land masses, so it was obviously rotating on its axis. Since then, I've met Jeffrey Williams, who was an astronaut. He spent more time on the ISS photographing the Earth from space than any other astronaut. He put a book together, the work of his hands. I think you understand that his there is our Lord and Creator. Here's a picture from inside of his book. Obviously, the Earth is spherical. He'll tell you that. In fact, when he speaks quite a bit. He's a devout Christian, speaks quite a bit. And one of the first things he does when he gets up, he says, I'm going to get this out of the way right now. The Earth is not flat. The Earth is a globe. We'll move on from there. Because he's just so tired of people asking him that and accusing him of not going into all of this. By the way, I know a third astronaut. His name is Butch Wilmore, or Barry Wilmore. He is going to be piloting the launch of the new spacecraft, so watch for that name. I've spoken to him, interviewed him a number of times. He's a very big supporter of us, and he's a creationist, and he loves the Lord as well. He's a born-again man. So I have 3 born-again men who can testify they have gone up and seen the Earth as a globe, and all I need are 2 or 3 witnesses. SU is settled biblically. And how in the world people can claim the name of Christ can accuse these fine Christian men of lying is a mystery to me. That's sinful, it's wicked, and they need to repent of that. What is their motivation? I think some are undoubtedly well-intentioned. I've met many of them that seem to mean well, but they're just simply confused on this matter. They've been led astray. I think there's a role of Gnosticism, this appeal of secret knowledge. I know something that's very little known, and these people I have found believe almost anything and everything that most everybody else believes. In fact, they believe very little that's reported in the news. There's no war going on in Israel. If there's a war going on in Ukraine, we're on the wrong side of that one. There are no nuclear weapons, never have been. That's a farce. And I'm not joking about this. It goes on and on and on. Almost everything that's generally believed is simply not true, because they're on the ground level of real truth, and you need to listen to them to find out what's really going on. You will no longer be deceived. The list of the things they believe is unbelievable. They're Gnostics to the core. Some people are doing this as a prank. I'm convinced some of them are doing it just to see if they can fool people, and they're having a lot of fun at some people's expense for being so gullible. Some of them are doing it, I think, to attempt to make Christians look foolish and discredit Scripture. I've been talking about this for a number of years. I've blogged about it, written about it. I've got over 30 articles on our website at answersongenesis.org. I've also written a book called Falling Flat. It's in English, but we do sell that book, and it has this and much more. Thank you very much for making me go into all this after my first step of saying no.